Thanks everyone for coming to my talk on VR, AR, and the Metaverse. I think I would love to just open up and ask, I know I asked earlier, but who here has access to or owns a virtual reality or an augmented reality device? Okay, sort of a trick question, because at the end of the day, most all of us have smartphones, and our smartphones are quite capable of some of the most sophisticated augmented reality around at the moment. So my goal for tonight, and by the way, I like this crowd. I like seeing people face to face because I spent past couple of years basically at home at a home office, and so now I'm finally out in front of people's faces. So I can talk about my virtual avatar. So we're gonna have some fun tonight. And please, if any of you all have questions that you want to ask, just feel free to ask, because we're a close enough crowd here that I wanna make sure that this time is worth it for you all, and you have your questions answered as well. Sound good? Okay, so, quick background, I live in this area. I live in downtown Durham, and I run a company called CrossComm. CrossComm is a web, mobile, and immersive app development studio. That's basically a lot to say that we build mobile apps, web apps, and augmented and virtual reality apps, and basically any kind of apps, innovation-leading apps for companies that need those apps to be built. And I got my start building websites for Netscape 1.1 back in the 90s. And back then, HTML was super easy. I could just basically view source, look at the tags, maybe discover one or two new tags that were recently invented and supported by web browsers, and then boom, I could start creating more interesting web pages. And that's how I got my start as my company. And things quickly got complicated from there. Eventually, JavaScript and different iterations of JavaScript were released, different HTML tags, XML, and all sorts of other technologies, some competing technologies along the way, like Flash, were released. But in the end, I think all of us had a vision of wanting to see applications become, web applications in particular, become as sophisticated as native applications. And so what was really exciting was when the iPhone was released. Anyone remember when Steve Jobs first introduced the iPhone? What kind of apps could you build for the iPhone? Web apps. Web apps. Steve Jobs was basically saying, you don't need the native SDK. You could just build web apps for our device. And quickly, people realized that that was not good enough. Basically, technology continued to move forward, and I think the most recent aha moment for me was a few years ago when I saw some of the early developer kits for the Oculus VR headset, and had that same aha moment that, yes, this is it. This is where the human-computer interaction paradigm is moving towards. And so that's how my journey went from web to mobile to augmented and virtual reality. Now, when I say virtual reality and augmented reality, I think it's really important for all of us to level set and make sure that we're on the same page as to what we're talking about. Because, there's the Cave VR setup, there's VR headsets, there's augmented reality phones, there is augmented reality headsets. So what are we talking about? There's too many R's: virtual reality, augmented reality, XR. So I describe virtual reality as basically an experience that puts a user in another reality, a computer-generated reality. That could mean video, that could mean audio, that could even mean smells. Believe it or not, there are VR headsets now that support odor cartridge packs. I'm not sure if I really want to support that feature just yet. But that's virtual reality. It puts a user in a completely different world or reality from the one that the user is currently in. In virtual reality, there are two distinctions that I like to make, although these distinctions are starting to fade away. There is 3 degrees of freedom, or 3 DOF experiences, and there's 6 degrees of freedom, or 6 DOF experiences. So 3 degrees of freedom, this is supposed to animate, but it's not. There we go. So 3 degrees of freedom VR experiences and devices, they track the rotation of your head. They track along the X, Y, and Z axis rotations. So a 3 DOF experience is one that you might typically find when someone is seated in a seat and not moving around, looking around you, left, right, up, down. Those are 3 degrees of freedom experiences. Very quickly, people realized that the immersion of 3 degrees of freedom experiences and the interactivity left much to be desired. So technology quickly moved towards 6 degrees of freedom experiences. Those support tracking along not just rotation of X, Y, and Z axes, but also positional translation or positional tracking along the X, Y, and Z axis. And what that allows the software to do is basically to know exactly where the user is within a physical 3-dimensional space and where their head is rotated. So they know where you're looking and they know where your position is within that experience, so they can start to support incredibly immersive experiences as a result. Everyone tracking so far? No pun intended. So that's virtual reality. Now, what is augmented reality? And why are they all acronyms with the letter R? Well, with augmented reality, instead of replacing your experience and the world around you with a computer-generated world, augmented reality aims to modify or augment your perception of the world around you. So here in this sample AR experience that my team had built as a demo, basically we have a toy model motorcycle sitting on a countertop. And that model motorcycle is then augmented upon by the computer. The software basically detects where the motorcycle is. It detects the dimensions of the motorcycle, and then it starts to recolorize the motorcycle according to my preference, potentially see a different visualization, maybe play around with some illusions by having a computer-generated ball going behind the motorcycle and in front of it to play around with your sense of depth. That's augmented reality. It basically is software that aims to modify your experience of your actual reality around you. And the reason why it's now all considered part of the family of reality technologies is because really, augmented and virtual reality are close cousins to each other technologically. They both rely upon a sense of space. They both rely upon a sense of dimension. And so really, with virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, and other reality terms that the industry is adopting, they're now generally considered all under the umbrella of the term XR, or extended reality, as a spectrum. So I can talk on and on about virtual reality and augmented reality, but it's really hard for someone to understand what that experience is like without actually trying it on for oneself. And because I didn't bring 30 or 40 headsets, I did bring a recording of a multi-user experience that we built for about 30 students in the Detroit area. These students were locked up in their living rooms during the COVID lockdown. And what we did was we created these virtual medical spaces for these students to virtually meet over the internet connection in a common virtual space and interact in team group activities and learning activities without having to leave their homes. Each of these students are wearing a VR headset of their own, and they are seeing their world in first person and interacting with their colleagues and their peers that are virtually next to them. They're interacting with each other, participating in exercises with each other, handing objects to each other, virtual objects, of course. And undergoing simulations together. There's some team building exercises where they were in an empty common space, but with some playful tools to be able to
your entire team makes it across.
Decorate their space.
The more you understand how each other works, the better you will be at the task. Nice job, guys. Oh my God.
The tools allow them to be expressive enough to even play rock, paper, scissors together.
Is that you can climb this. Oh my. Get off, come on down. Oh my God, you guys are like, get off the stage. What do you guys think about this virtual space? It's so cool. So cool, thank you.
So that's what, that was a little bit of magic that the virtual reality experience and world space provided for these students to be able to participate and interact with each other, even though they were not able to see each other face to face. Let's talk about use cases for both virtual reality and augmented reality, because having a multi-user or multiplayer common space for socializing and collaborating, there's a lot of positive aspects of that, but I think that it's really, what I really want everyone to know is that there are really strong, concrete use cases for VR and AR in both work and in life. So I was sharing earlier that I believe the killer application for VR is simulation and training. And not just any environment, although there are a lot of environments that can be simulated with virtual reality. VR excels at simulating environments that are expensive to replicate, that are scarce, dangerous, or physically impossible. Let's go through each of those real quickly. So imagine having to train and using a full body MRI scanner in a hospital. Those things cost $3 million, I think. And a hospital building can only afford to have one installed in the building. And that one unit has to service both patients in order to generate revenue, as well as provide time cycles for training for residents and for people who need to use that expensive equipment. Well, there is no substitute for training on a physical in-person device. But what if you had a digital virtual replica in virtual reality that you could then rotate people training on that device? It's a $3 million unit. So to be able to offer the ability for people to train on a simulated version of that device could be really beneficial. What about scarcity? If there are potentially rare artifacts that are in a museum in London, and only people who are residents in London can experience those artifacts, what if you could potentially have digital replicas to be able to solve the problem of scarcity and solve the problem of travel and distance? Danger. What if you were responsible for training a crew to man a factory that was physically dangerous due to heavy machinery, where one wrong move can result in a loss of limb? Then having a digital replica in VR where you can train or spend a good amount of your time training with a safe replica in VR could help prevent physical injury. And then finally, physical impossibility. There is no way for me to miniaturize myself because Honey, I Shrunk the Kids is not real. But what if there was some research benefit or even clinical educational benefit to miniaturize myself to the size of a blood cell and to walk in my own blood vessel and see my own plaque and be invested in my own health to make sure that I cut down on my cholesterol. Those kind of situations are physically impossible, but they do become possible when we're talking about simulated VR. Also, what you saw here with this particular real-world example of having several students in the same physical space, or not same virtual space, be able to interact with each other, socialize with each other, learn together in a way that was meant to be in a classroom, but was not possible during the pandemic. I think that with the advent of COVID, the world is never going back. We'll still have our offices. I still have an office for CrossComm, but we're not going to be going back to the office with the same frequency as before, ever again. And so having these kind of tools to allow for more of a sense of presence in collaborating with other people is going to be essential for how we go about work for really the rest of our lives. So remote collaboration, online community, immersive telepresence, having a sense of camaraderie and teamwork and onboarding in a way that cannot be replicated through a Zoom call are all viable use cases for VR. There's a few others like virtual tourism, marketing, documentary journalism, and entertainment. This is actually a 360-degree video of me and my daughter on a rotating carousel. That's why it looks so skewed, because it's actually a spherical video. And someone can actually watch that in a VR headset as if their head was in the same position of where the 360-degree camera was when it recorded. So a lot of great use cases for VR, but the use cases for augmented reality are actually going to be far more and far greater. Really, AR is going to be appropriate and ideal for pretty much everything else. Why? Because virtual reality has one very taxing requirement, and that is that it requires your full attention in order to use a VR headset. When I am wearing that VR headset on my face, I have at times almost hit my children flailing my arms around because I cannot see my environment around me. VR occludes my perception of the world around me. Augmented reality just simply augments and modifies and enhances my perception of the world around me. So therefore, the use cases for augmented reality are going to be far broader once we solve the problem of figuring out how to use augmented reality without having to require our hands. I had alluded to that earlier in an earlier conversation, that the biggest impediment to the propagation of augmented reality is the fact that currently the most common augmented reality device, the smartphone, requires you to hold the device with a hand. As long as you're holding that device with your hand, that hinders some of the things that you can potentially do in work, in the factory, in the office, and in life. Sometimes I feel like my Apple Watch is my most useful augmented reality device because it doesn't require any hands, and I can use it and talk to and communicate with people hands-free. But so augmented reality, especially when smart glasses and wearable AR devices become more prevalent, are going to really be everywhere in work and life. The kind of applications that are really being sought after right now are applications in remote assistance, where one subject matter expert could potentially service many workers out in the field. Contextual training and learning for me as a worker to be able to look at an information pane or hardware and to be able to see labels and contextual information all around what I'm seeing in real time. Telepresence is also going to be a definite use case for AR, to be able to have board meetings or virtual meetings with family members or loved ones, and to be able to see them in 3 dimensions rather than in 2. And really, any kind of application that leverages 3D data. That could be engineering, as in CAD models, three-dimensional art, sculptures. Medical anatomy is a huge, huge use case for AR and VR, and anything else where 3D qualities are essential to understanding. So that's augmented and virtual reality and the different use cases that are going to be common in the near-term future. So what about this newfangled term, the metaverse? What is this term, the metaverse, that people have been talking about? What is it? What does it mean? Well, firstly, the metaverse is not some kind of platform. The metaverse is not some kind of Facebook IP. More than anything, the metaverse is an idea. It's an idea, and by the way, it's not even a term that Facebook or Mark Zuckerberg created. It's actually a term that originated from a science fiction novel, Snow Crash. And what it describes, this idea that it describes, is sort of like a three-dimensional World Wide Web. I compare it to the World Wide Web because oftentimes the metaverse is described as this idea of an interconnected network of virtual worlds and spaces. So it's similar to the internet in that the web, the World Wide Web, is an interconnected network of websites, right? But we're talking about three-dimensional spaces. And moreover, these three-dimensional spaces are meant to be occupied with a virtual presence, a social or multiplayer experience where these virtual spaces could be occupied by users or players. And so when you hear the word metaverse, it's often meant to describe this interconnected network of virtual spaces, multiplayer or multi-user, where users can then interact with each other virtually. And so it builds upon this fundamental building block of VR. There have been metaverses in the past. Metaverses, this idea of virtual worlds is nothing new. Of course, many of you are already familiar with Second Life, but you use that through a PC computer screen. But when people think of the metaverse, they think of an experience that is driven by virtual reality or spatial technologies like augmented reality. And so the metaverse is an idea, and I describe this idea as both now and not yet. Why both now and not yet? Well, as I mentioned, we already have had metaverse platforms out there like Second Life, AltSpace. It's now owned by Microsoft, but AltSpace has been around for many years now. Games like World of Warcraft, these MMO RPGs, massively multiplayer online role-playing games, those have been around for decades now. Even games that our children play, like Minecraft. I consider Minecraft a proto-metaverse-like platform because users can create their own worlds. They can enter and hop from one world to another. And then they can also have customized assets that they own for customizing their characters and their players and their friends. Roblox, Horizon Worlds is the newest one that was created by Facebook. And the frustrating thing about all of these metaverse-like platforms is that none of them are interoperable. And so right now, all of the manifestations of the metaverse are completely failing the fundamental premise of the metaverse, which is this idea of having interchangeable, interconnected worlds that we can hop from one to another in a multiplayer or social fashion. And yet, we see fragments of the experience in existence today in some of these platforms like AltSpace and Minecraft, Roblox. And so where are the commercial opportunities going to lie for these metaverse-like worlds? Firstly, meeting spaces for work, learning, and play. Work, learning, and play. The idea of these metaverse experiences is that they're going to offer the opportunity for us to do many of the kind of activities that we typically already do in life. Socializing with our friends, socializing with our coworkers, collaborating with our coworkers, and learning new things, and of course, entertainment and play. Because oftentimes learning and play are inextricably tied together. We're already starting to see branding opportunities from major brands and the issuance of digital assets, NFTs. And there's also going to be a new opportunity for people to create content, create worlds, create interactivity, create learning content, work content, and entertainment content. The possible speed bumps, though, are many. Firstly, and this is really important when you are making the decision as to where to spend your development dollars, VR headsets like the Oculus Quest, they're approximately, well, actually, that's old data. It's $400 now, $400 now. And that's, you know, relatively affordable, still cheaper than a Microsoft Xbox Series X or a PlayStation 5, but it's not super cheap. It's still a good enough prize to get a good crowd out on an evening for all things open. So they're cheap, but they're not super cheap. Also, there is the number of devices that are out there in general. So augmented reality can run on smartphones. We talked about that. It's not quite super valuable because it requires someone to hold the device. So AR's full potential won't be realized until it's hands-free. And we also talked about how the metaverse ecosystem is still balkanized. I mean, if you want your brand presence to be in every metaverse platform, that's a lot of platforms to support. Walmart just got on Roblox recently, but are they going to also make the same investment in Minecraft content, in World of Warcraft, and whatever other multi-user platform is out there? So it's until it becomes more interchangeable and more compatible, I think that metaverse experience of being able to flow from one world to another is still going to elude us. But what can we do today? Because you all are a techie crowd. You're not business marketers, or maybe you are, but I think that this is a very tech-oriented event and meetup. The good news is that it is easier than ever to develop content for metaverse-like platforms. If you're not a developer, there's a couple of things you could do right away. One is cheap and one is not so cheap. It costs $15 to rent Ready Player One. It's a movie on iTunes. Well, it was a book before it was a movie. And if you haven't watched the movie, I would strongly recommend you spend a couple hours and $15 to watch the movie. It's a fun flick. Steven Spielberg produced it. And it really opens up one's eyes to what interchangeable worlds could potentially look like. And then, if you're willing to spend $400, I would strongly recommend that if you don't win that Oculus Quest tonight, that you go out and buy a device for yourself. Because again, there is no substitute for experiencing virtual reality and virtual worlds for yourself. If you have developer skills, and I know not all of us do, but if you have a leaning towards development, it's never been easier to play around with virtual and augmented reality. Are you a web developer that knows JavaScript and HTML tags? Then go to aframe.io, which is a 3D framework for making declarative, making VR graphics through declarative HTML. It is super easy to learn. It reminds me, when I picked it up, it reminds me of when I first picked up HTML 1.1 with Netscape 1.1. So strongly recommend that if you're a web developer with a web background, take a look at A-Frame. It will allow you to create VR and AR content that runs through a web browser. Are you a mobile app developer? Both Apple's ARKit and Google's AR Core offer some of the most sophisticated and free-to-use augmented reality technologies out there, from SLAM tracking to image marker tracking, being able to recognize planes in a camera view. All those capabilities are accessible to you as the developer for free through ARKit and AR Core. Are you looking to create more of a rich media interactive experience? you can now download game development environment tools like Unity and Unreal to develop XR experiences, VR and AR experiences through common languages like C# and .NET, the .NET API, and C++, respectively. So there's pretty much now a pathway of entry for any developer from any background to get into and play around with XR development, whether we're talking about through a web browser with JavaScript or through native compiled languages like Swift and Kotlin, and also C++ and C#. Any questions about those specifically? Yes, yes. Yes, the wonderful thing about both Unity and Unreal is they are now both quite mature game development environments that can create rich interactive software for pretty much almost any device out there. We're talking about HoloLens, Microsoft HoloLens, Oculus Quest, of course, Magic Leap, etc. Let's see, experience, hack and play around, and finally, brainstorm. So when these devices become ubiquitous, and I think that they're not going to be, when I think of the time when these devices are going to be ubiquitous, I don't think about a particular year. I think about a critical point where basically one of the big tech companies, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, releases a consumer-priced AR device that has the capabilities that people associate with smart glasses. I think once that happens, that's when we're going to see another app explosion similar to what we saw when Apple released the iPhone and Google released the Android phone. We're going to see an explosion of applications because that's when finally that technology will be really, truly useful for the consumer. And the kind of ideas that are going to be available for app developers to really monopolize on and make their fortunes on are some of the things that I discussed earlier. Apps that leverage 3D content, apps that have a stronger sense of immersion, apps that replicate scenarios that are expensive, scarce, dangerous, or impossible. Augmented reality apps that leverage contextual assistance for learning or training. Visualizing a change in real-world surroundings or enhancing digital content associated with digital artifacts. Here you could see this quick demo, that augmented reality demo that we had created a while back to demo for McDonald's, where basically we took their Happy Meal box and the augmented reality software recognized the dimensions of the Happy Meal box, and once it locked into those dimensions, then it created this fictitious adventure world around the Happy Meal box where a kid could then tap on collectibles on the screen to collect all of them. So that's an example of enhanced digital content associated with a physical artifact. But basically, this opportunity is coming for all of us with developer skills, and it's up to us to have the imagination and the vision to see where things are going to be in the next few years ahead, and to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. That's all I got for you all. Tried to cover all the basics of basically where the technology is at, how to go about determining use cases for the technology, and opportunities for developers to gain entryways into learning and tinkering and hacking with the stuff. Did I miss anything, or is there any other questions that I can answer?